We're doing all sorts of fun things here in this tiny little room. So my big thing is paper piecing, and Jan does paper piecing too, and I do a little bit different method of paper piecing where I paper piece on strips by doing multiple assembly line paper piecing. So here's an example of a block here. This is called the Star Dance block, and it's made up of 8 wedges like this, and I do all 8 of them at the same time on strips like that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do that. Just briefly, I'm not going to go through every single step, but I'm going to tell you a little bit.
Hold it a little closer so that they can see there.
I'm going to go through the
printed lines there.
Yeah. Okay, so if you want to bring up that very first slide, Lisa, this shows you a pattern, and this is the Star Dance pattern. It's in the book as well, in my book. And if you move that aside, you can see the book. And so what you do is make copies of your pattern, and it does give you permission to do that in the front of the book. And then when I do that, if you want to look at this pattern for a minute, it's a little different than other patterns. I know it's kind of a small image there, but you can see that it does have numbers on it. Also in the upper left-hand corner, there's a picture of the block, so you can color it in however you want to try out different colors. But you've got the numbers are the order in which you sew. And there's also arrows on the pattern, and the arrows are going to show you how to position that pattern on the strip so you never do it the wrong way. That's assuming you put the arrow the right way, and the arrow is always going to point away from you, just the way you'd shoot an arrow off into the air. You'd never shoot an arrow at yourself. So as you place that on the strip, as I'll show you in a minute, the arrow is going to point toward your sewing machine or away from you in the part that you're sewing. So to start out, I'll make my copies, as I said, and I'm going to cut them out. You can get rid of the slide if you want to, Lisa, so they can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to cut them out right on the outer dotted line so that I have no extra paper on the edges. And it does have the seam allowance out here so that you can know exactly how much fabric you need to have to cover that area. So when I start out, I'll have my strip for number 1 and my strip for number 2. And my number 1 strip is a really wide one. It's the background, 3 3/4. My number 2 strip is only 1 1/4. And I'm going to put those right sides together with number 1 on top. Oops, move this over a little bit. And this looks really odd because normally if you were going to sew those strips together, you would have the skinnier one on top, wouldn't you? But it doesn't matter if it's skinnier or wider, number 1 always goes on top. And we're always going to be sewing consistently with the seam allowance on the right-hand side the way you would normally sew a seam. Because of that, that means after I sew this, number 2 is going to flip out to the right. And I found nobody could remember that. Put your pattern on so number 2 is to the right of number 1. So that's what the arrows tell you. So I imagine my 1/4-inch sewing line here, and that's where I place the sewing line between 1 and 2. And I don't know if you can tell, there's a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance there. Probably can't see the line, but the line's going right along the 1/4-inch line. After I sew the first one, I'll put the next one on and so on and keep building and building until I get all 8 of them on there. And then it's going to look like this nice long string of stuff here we have. And so after we sewed it looks like that. All 8 of them are on here. You can see what a time saver that is. You also save a lot of fabric. Even though we're going to waste a little bit over here, you're going to save all that extra fabric that you didn't have to leave in between. Now before I cut them apart, it's very important, any paper piecing, you always, always open out what you added before you cut anything. And it's really important because oftentimes we're cutting at angles. And if you cut at an angle and that's closed, when you open it up, it won't cover what it has to cover on the next area. So I'll cut those apart. And then after I do that, you can just put that one down, Jan, thanks. I'll have a piece that looks like this. So there's extra hanging out over the edges here. And I'm just going to trim anything hanging over the outside edge. And I'm ready to put these on strip number 2. So after I trim them out, it's going to look like this, nice and neat on this side. And from then on in, or rather strip number 3, I did 1 and 2 the first time. So this is strip number 3, and that will be right side up because all my fabric is going right side down. So I'll look at my area for number 3, find where my arrows are pointing, and again, imagine my 1/4-inch sewing line here. That's where I place the sewing line for number 3, and I'll add all of those 8 at the same time and sew them. And so that's basically how you do it. It's really a pretty easy thing to do. When you get all 8 of your little wedges done, when all 8 of these are done, it's going to look like this. Of course, the color will be a little different here. But it's going to be an octagon. So you're going to be adding triangles to the corners. Now, actually, I do have a little picture there. The next slide, Lisa, number 2, shows the sewing machine. I forgot to bring that one up. So it shows you what it looks like as it goes through your machine. So you can see there how those look like when they're actually flat and your machine not up on a wall like we have them here. So that gives you an idea what that's like. So you can take that slide away if you want. I think they get the idea there. So once I've added, oh, we're not quite ready for that yet, but I guess we could have it there. So this is the quilt I made using this block. And because we've got these corners here, if you want to move your little picture aside, you can see where these corners would be coming. Here I've got the same color corner on this dark one, just like I did in the center of this quilt. This is the Star Dance quilt. And on the outside borders of that block, because this block is at a right angle here, I can take this I can take other blocks and use this as a border. So I can have another block coming in here, as you can see at the corners there. And so for these outer blocks, I use light backgrounds, and I put dark corners in the triangles, dark colors in the triangle corners. And what that does is it makes it look kind of curved, doesn't it? And I really love the fact that you can do straight lines and have something that ends up looking curved. So I took that same idea of these rings going around the center, and I did the next slide, if you want to bring that one up. The next quilt's called Autumn Dance. And this one's a little bit larger idea of just taking those rings and moving them around, and light and dark backgrounds alternating with light and dark corners. It looks very complicated, but this is a very, very simple block of piece. You just have to make a lot of them to make a quilt that size. So that's really a lot of fun. So you can take that slide down and wait just a second for the next one if you would. So that's the Star Dance block. I do look to traditional blocks a lot of times for ideas. And one of the blocks that I've always loved is the palm leaf block. This is a traditional block. And this is what it looks like. This is a traditional 30s palm leaf. This one was actually hand-pieced. It was given to me by a gal named Marcia Given from the San Fernando Valley when I was teaching there. She said, you've got to have one of these traditional blocks. So this is what it looks like traditionally. It's also called Hosanna. So I made the block a little differently here. I colored it a little more like a tulip. I thought it was going to look like a tulip. Kind of does in version of 1 here. But I colored it differently, and I made this exact same set. I made 4 of these going around, and I made 4 blocks like that, and I spun them around this corner. So if this was in the center, spun around, and I used this coloration, it made the Christmas cactus quilt, which is our next slide, I believe. If you want to bring that one up. So that's what that looks like when I did 16. And you can see if you look at just one corner there, you can see that exact same block done 4 times spun around the center. Now I really thought when I got this quilt done, it did not look like tulips. It looked way more like a Christmas cactus. So I called this Christmas cactus because it just looks like that to me. So you can take that one down if you would, Lisa. And so here's this block, and it's made up of 2 parts. We have an A and a B. And if I color them both the same like that, I have this block. If I just use 2 different colors here, and I did a blue leaf with an orange background, this is a great opportunity to do something called positive-negative design. And what I'm going to do is, instead of having both of these be a blue leaf on an orange background, I'm going to have one of them be an orange leaf on a blue background. So when I sew that together, this is what that block looks like. And you can see it doesn't look like that traditional palm leaf anymore, does it? We have a totally different looking block there. So if I do 4 of these and spin them around the corner like I did in the center of that other Christmas cactus quilt, you'll have this next quilt. And if you can bring up the next slide there, Lisa. Okay, this one I call Cactus Tree. I'm from Ohio. All these spiky points remind me of cactus when you live in Southern California. So anyway, this is the Cactus Tree. And you can see this is nothing like that traditional old palm leaf. It really looks very, very different and a lot more modern. It's a really fun quilt to do for a kid going to college, or maybe your teenage son or daughter. It's a fun, fun quilt. So you can take away the Cactus Tree. And our next block I wanted to look at is a wishing star block. And this one, let me get it out here. This one is also based on half square triangles. And I'll show you the elements of that. So here's two half-square triangles, just like the same size exactly as we use in a palm leaf, only they're designed a little bit differently. You can see I've got points that cross each other this time. And you saw in that star dance block, well, maybe you didn't see, but we sewed all the way straight across from edge to edge on those patterns. On the palm leaf, it was the same way. Well, on these, they're a little more complicated because these points don't go all the way from edge to edge across. We have to stop and lift our foot in between so that we can, maybe I'll show it up close here. So you can see they don't go all the way from edge to edge. I have to stop, lift my foot, and slide down to where I can put the next piece on, and that works really well. So this is what this block looks like straight, and I actually did design it to be sent on point. So here's what it looks like on point, and if you can bring up photo 7 for me, Lisa, we'll see a quilt done with this block on point. So I call this Wishing for Spring, because it's a wishing star block, and this really looked like spring, that wonderful floral fabric in the background. And this is a good example of using mirrors too, Jan. I often use Jan's mirrors when I'm doing these symmetrical kinds of settings for these blocks. It makes a fun quilt, and you only have to sew 4 blocks. The rest is done with the fabric. One of the things, though, that when you're doing a quilt like this, where it's set on point, you have to sew diagonally across the quilt, and I find a lot of people get confused by that. For beginners, it's a little bit more complicated to make a quilt that way. You have to know what size to cut your diamonds, where the threaded grain is, and all that stuff when you're diamonds, your triangles, your side triangles. Jan's got me thinking about diamonds here. Those side triangles, so that you have your straighted grain going the right direction. So it's a little more complicated. So I was trying to think of a way to make it easier. So if you want to put that slide down, Lisa, I'm going to play up here on the board for a minute. So I could put this block on point just like this by putting triangles in the corners. Whoops, let me help me hold that one, Jan. Jan and I have these careers as the phantom hands here, with the hands that just come around the back. Anyway, so here we have the wishing star on point, and we've got triangles in the corner. Now, just so happens, if you look at that triangle in the corner, and if we look at the triangles that make up this block, here's 2 triangles making up that block. The exact same size triangles are going to fit in that corner because it's just making up a square here. So in other words, I could take this, oh, she was so ready to hold it up there. Okay, and I could put these triangles in the corners, and I'm going to sew them together into triangles instead of into a square this time. Put them in the corners, and then Lisa, if you want to bring up the photo number 8, it will show you a wishing star block with all the triangles in the corners. There we go. So I'm going to block those up here too, just so they're here also. And then if you want to bring the next photo, it shows the actual quilt made with 4 of these block units. And of course, when they come together, they're going to form a dark square in the center where all 4 of those dark corners come together. So this is actually on the cover of the second book. And that particular quilt was made by my friend Pat Wolf, and it's called Starlight, Starbright. And you can see what a fun way that is. You don't have to sew the diagonal seams. You just sew these in the squares with the triangles in the corners, and it makes a great way to put that quilt together. So you can put that picture down, and we're going to go on to exploring what happens now. Because these triangles are exactly the same size as the palm leaf triangles, I could put palm leaf triangles in the corners of this wishing star quilt. So if Jan wants to take those off. So again, here's my palm leaf triangles. And this is the way I would sew them together to make a square palm leaf block. But there's 3 sides to that triangle, aren't there? So I could sew them together on this side to make the triangle for the corners. It kind of looks like a flying geese. So if I put those in the corner, and I'm going to put another one up here. And let's see if Jan can get that one up that corner up there, and I'll put this one over here. So you can see how this block would look like that. And I believe at least also has a slide of that with the colors I actually used.
I am loving this quilt. I want to go make one of these.
So if you want to bring up number 10, photo number 10, I think that might be the light one. It might be the dark one. Yeah, there's a light one. These are the colors I actually used. And then bring up photo 11. I don't know if you want to have them together or if you can do that. They can see both of them maybe. Move one aside. So I used ones with dark backgrounds and one with light backgrounds. And so I put those together. I made 9 blocks total to make what I call the Dusk to Dawn quilt. And if you want to bring up photo 12, that will show us the actual finished quilt using those 2 blocks alternating. And I did use a scrap sort of approach to this one. Each star is a little different. But you can see all the fun secondary patterns that form with that. That's one of the really exciting things, I think, when you start combining patterns like this and setting them block to block. You get a lot of secondary patterns that are really great.
Peggy, Anita asked a question.
Oh, she
said, did you preview the units with the quilter's mirror?
You know, I actually didn't. I knew they were going to come together. I didn't know what it was going to exactly look like. I'm sort of one of these people that wants to sit down and sew the block instead of always doing these previews. And I know you could do them on EQ and all these things too, but I tend to just, I can make these blocks and what happens. I sort of work that way, and then I'm kind of surprised by the results.
We talk about the value of having a lot of fabric versus not.
Oh, she says, what's the value of having a lot of fabric versus not having enough? The value is you got lots of choices. The downside is you can't walk through your sewing room anymore. That's the problem there. Okay, so here's my triangle again. So we can get all these down, Jan. We're ready for another block. So I'm going to bring up this block. This is another wishing star. And remember, there's 3 sides to this triangle. This one I'm going to keep in it. You can take this one down. Okay, we have 3 sides to our triangle here. We'll get our little block up there. So we look at this as our palm leaf. This was our flying geese one. And if I sew the 3rd side together, I'll get something that looks like, sort of like a sawtooth. And so this time I decided, for this next quilt I'm going to show you, but don't bring it up yet, Lisa. I'm going to show it up here first. This one I've got a light background, and if I sewed this as a palm leaf, what I did was use the background color where the palm leaf is, and I put all the bright colors in what was the background of the original palm leaf. So when I sew these together, and drop them on the floor a few times, they're going to look like that. So I have some more color happening in that little corner area. So I'm going to plug those in on here. I'll give you that one for the upper corner. So when I plug those in, we get a completely different look, especially because we've got that contrasting color coming in. And it really causes, here, it really causes that to look kind of like it's exploding out from the center. And I also wanted to use these as borders going around the quilt, these same little units. So I was getting kind of tired of making wishing star blocks, so I decided I was just going to make 1 wishing star block, and I made 16 of these palm leaf units, and I made them in reds and blacks. And if you want to bring up that next photo, number 14, I guess you could have showed 13 if you want to too. But yeah, this is called Nightfire. This is the quilt that's behind me, which we can't really see right now, but maybe I can scoot over a little bit. You can also see it behind me if you move the, there's the center. So that was the photo before. And then if you want to bring up the quilt photo again, the one after that, yeah, there we go. They're both up there now. If you move one aside, click and drag, and you can see both of them. And then the quilt is also behind me. So this was just a very fortuitous quilt. After I'd made all those blocks, I actually had them laid out originally on a black background where all that interesting sort of Indian-looking stripe is in there. That was just black, and I'm not a very good machine quilter, so I thought maybe I have a stripe in my stash. And I happen to have the very perfect symmetrical fabric that I could use to go around that great medallion there. So I was looking at these wishing star blocks. You can put that quilt down if you want to, Lisa. And just recently I revisited this block. It's fun to go back and like think about different things you can do. Up till now I've been adding things to this block. Well, I decided what would happen if I just looked at, instead of looking at the whole star, just looked at a quarter of the star. So instead of looking at this whole thing and working with that, just look at 1/4 of that and make a lot of units and only sew them into squares. And so what I did was I made a bunch of units with really bright yellow backgrounds. It was way too bright to be a quilt, so I wasn't happy with those. I thought, well, I don't want to play with those. They're too bright. But I decided to keep the same colors, and I switched with a black background with some really bright fabrics and played around with them and came up with this next quilt. So this one's number 16, Lisa. And can you bring that one up? There we go. Okay, so look how very different that looks from a wishing star block. There is a wishing star set straight in the center there, but all the rest of the stuff around there is basically just barn raising, like you do with a log cabin, just done with those squares of the wishing star unit. So what a fun way to play around with the block and revisit a block. You could do this with a lot of other blocks too. So if you want to take that one down, Lisa, I'm just going to bring up a couple real quick quilts here at the end. And she may or may not have the block. So here I've got a block that looks a lot like a mariner's compass. but it isn't. So it's drafted a little bit differently. All this is really is just 8 wedges, 8 of these wedges here. You see that wedge? 8 of those sewn into a circle. So it has 16 points, just like a mariner's compass, but way, way easier to piece. So this block I put on point. Again, I've got symmetrical fabric here in the corners, which I could have used mirrors to make. But I also think it's a lot of fun to add circles to it. I'm not sure if you can really see this quilt, but Lisa does have this slide. This is number 17. She can show you a slide of the whole quilt while we're holding up a little piece of it here. She's typing. There we go. So this I call Summer in Provence, because that blue and yellow fabric really reminded me of Provence fabric. And this has that same center circle with some added rings to it. And it was really fun to do this curvy piece border out there. And that was, you'd think that looks so complicated to sew this curve. And it is hard if you sew that as a traditional curve. It's very, very difficult to sew a curve that goes both directions, in and out. But the secret to the whole thing is to baste these onto freezer paper, turn the edges under, glue baste it to your points, and machine applique it with invisible thread. Nobody would ever know you didn't piece it. So there's that one, and then this very last quilt here is just a fun way to do an artistic interpretation of the, I called it the evening star, that pretend mariner's compass there. But what I have done is just added one ring around it, and then I've just raw edge appliqued a whole bunch of rays in bright colors going around it to make it look like the setting sun, and this is called Solar Wind. So I think it's so much fun to play with my blocks. I hope you all enjoyed watching what I had to do, and I do have the book that has both these patterns in, and also the wishing star and the palm leaf are both on my DVD. It tells you in great detail how to do both of those blocks, and also talks somewhat about the designs that I showed you here too. So thanks a lot, Lisa.